This is the lecture for Michael Robillard's article, No Such Thing as Killer Robots. So the first topic is collective action problems. So he mentions on page 4, the bottom of page 4, he talks about there's an example of a collective action problem. And so, just briefly, a collective action problem is a problem that shows up in a context where collectively it seems like we're doing something that maybe is bad or that we don't want to be doing or something like this, but our individual actions aren't obviously like bad in the same sort of way. So, for instance, when an individual drives a car around or burns trash or something, they add just a tiny, tiny amount of air pollution to the air. Really, such a negligible amount that it's effectively harmless. But collectively, when we drive cars around and collectively when we burn trash, we create lots of air pollution. And so often these kinds of problems are tricky because it's not clear exactly what to think about them. Like what it, for instance, is the moral responsibility of each individual person. When I drive a car around and I create a tiny, tiny bit of pollution, am I effectively not responsible for anything because my pollution is so tiny? But if everybody thinks like that, then we end up with quite a bit of pollution. And so these are classical sort of tricky questions for morality because individually it seems like we're almost harmless, but collectively we're not harmless. And one interesting sort of case comes up in EndNote 15. Uh, so in EndNote 15, Robillard mentions this thing called the harmless torturers case in Derek Parfit's book Reasons and Persons. And so the harmless torturer case is a case where somebody's hooked up to some kind of torture machine, and there's a dial that you can turn that determines how much pain they're feeling. And the dial has 1,000 settings from 0 to 1,000. And each time you turn the dial up by 1, the pain goes up by like 1/1000th of a step. So it's like effectively imperceptible. The person can barely even notice, probably can't even notice when you turn the dial up by 1. And so, 1,000 people walk by and they each get paid some amount of money to like turn the dial up by 1. And so each person says, oh, well, I'm only turning the dial up by 1. It's like barely hurting this person at all. The difference between like a 6 and a 7 or a 96 and a 97 or a 976 and a 977. The difference is like nothing. And meanwhile, I'm getting paid for it or something. So, might as well. I'm not doing anything particularly wrong. But then, of course, when all 1,000 of these people reason like this and they all turn the dial up by 1, the person ends up at 1,000. And so they're in quite a bit of pain. And so it seems like something has gone wrong somewhere. And so that's a sort of like a very clean hypothetical case where it's just like, look, very small contribution to very bad outcome, and it might help us think about collective action problems generally without all the complications that arise in something, more complicated like air pollution from driving around or things like that.